Hey everyone, this is Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to Untold Stories. This is a show where we dive deep into the lives and personal histories of some of crypto's most influential leaders and find out how the crypto movement truly came to be. Let's dive in. This podcast is presented by Blockworks Group, the only blockchain event and media production company I trust. For exclusive content and events that provide insight into the crypto and blockchain space, visit them at blockworksgroup.io. I promise you won't be disappointed. My next guest is a very interesting person. She founded Bancor, which is an interesting name because it goes back to the 1940s when Keynes decided that eventually we need a supernatural currency or a global clearinghouse between all the different currencies in the world. This was pre-World War II. After World War II, there were some really powerful people that wanted the Bancor. Now, this is over 60, 70 years ago, before cryptocurrency, wanted Bancor to be the global cryptocurrency, global currency that everyone used around the world, a clearinghouse. So it's very interesting that my next guest, Galia Benartzi, she decided to name her project after this. And I'm going to ask a very interesting question in a second. But for those who don't know, Bancor was one of the earlier projects that had launched, I believe around 2017, 2018. And Bancor is designed to solve the illiquidity problem that we have in crypto. It's a network that allows people to change from one token to another token without having to rely on centralized exchanges, but at the same time not having to even rely on decentralized exchanges. Rather, the protocol itself allows for liquidity to be passed amongst all these different coins and tokens. Galia, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for the warm intro.
So tell me about the name, because you and I have very similar backgrounds. And in a lot of cultures, in Judaism, in Islam, and in Christianity, the idea of like a global currency is kind of seen as like the Satan, the end of days. Don't you think it's like calling my crypto Satan or something like that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and interesting background that you start with, and I want to kind of clarify it a little bit from mine and from our perspective. So the story of Bancor, the original Bancor that you're talking about from the 1940s, it actually was introduced in 1944. And it's a special time because it's the time of a monetary conference that maybe we all remember like vaguely from high school, from Econ 101.
What high school did you go to? Because my high school did not teach economics or finance or anything like that.
So I went to a couple high schools, both in Palo Alto, California, where I grew up, and also in the suburbs of Tel Aviv, where my parents grew up. And in neither one of them did I learn about what I'm about to share, but it did ring a bell for me from early kind of history and econ classes, which is the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. So this is kind of a global monetary conference that happened not before World War II, but quite during World War II, actually towards the end of World War II, and the end of the war is on the horizon. And the world powers essentially got together in this town called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, at a big, beautiful country club, essentially a state. And there were delegates from all the allied nations, 44 nations, I believe, and about 700 delegates, most of them men. And they got together to kind of define the post-war financial order. Why do you need to do that? Well, all the economies are decimated. All of the infrastructure is decimated. Most of the gold is with America because everyone paid America, for help with commodities, with weapons, with supplies, what have you. Those countries have maybe currencies that no one will accept anymore. You need to make a game plan. You need to make a structure. And at this conference at Bretton Woods, a couple really key things were decided on and instated into the global financial order that very much still define our system today. So I'll run through a couple of them. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, was born at this conference. The World Bank was born at Bretton Woods. The World Trade Organization, WTO, was born at Bretton Woods. And maybe most significantly, the US dollar, at the time, of course, it was backed by gold, was established as the global reserve currency.
And the concept of a global reserve currency is hotly contested in the crypto space, even the non-crypto space, because today it's being used as a weapon, correct?
So a global reserve currency is different than a global currency. And this is where in your intro, when you talk about Bancor, I wanted to make the distinction. You said that Bancor was intended to be a global currency, and isn't global currency kind of anathema to where we're going with decentralization? And the distinction is it was intended, and the US dollar eventually became the global reserve currency. What does the reserve currency mean? It means the one that, first of all, prices are denominated in. It's like the benchmark currency, the backbone currency. You can have other currencies, but they are measured in relation to their value to the reserve currency. And in fact, the reserve currency is needed for these cross-currency transactions. So the big battle of Bretton Woods, essentially, and that's also the title of a great book by Dr. Ben Steele that I highly recommend. The big battle of Bretton Woods was, like you say, between the Bancor proposal, which was made by Keynes of Keynesian economics. He was the Treasury Minister for the UK, obviously a big player in this conference, maybe second only to the United States, and the US dollar as the global reserve currency, which was the American devised plan and the one that they wanted to push forward and the one they succeeded in establishing. And so
the idea...
Yeah, I'll tell you what that means is that if the US dollar is the global reserve currency and Germany wants to make a trade with America, that trade is happening in US dollars. If France wants to make a trade with Germany, the way they measure the franc to the German mark is via each one's relative price in US dollars. So the US dollar becomes that central clearing currency, if you will. And the counter proposal that was suggested by Keynes was to introduce a new currency. He called it Bancor, a supranational currency, meaning it's a currency of not belonging to any nation. Every nation still keeps their own currency, the US dollar, the German mark, whatever it is. But there's a new currency, which is the clearing currency between the nations, meaning that the balance of payments, the balance of trade between nation A and nation B is being cleared via Bancor or via the US dollar. And what Keynes said, and this is kind of bringing us to modern times of why we named our cryptocurrency project Bancor, what Keynes said was that if you give this global reserve status to the currency that is also the domestic currency of a specific nation, be it the US or the UK. And mind you, the Brits were coming off of a long legacy of having the pound sterling be the global reserve currency, right? So they have had a lot of experience being that mistake, if you will, that highly lucrative mistake. He said that if you give that power to a specific nation, you're giving them very outsized power in the global economy. You're essentially creating an unbalanced playing field because that country can now, potentially manipulate its supply. It can potentially inflate its supply, but it can socialize to the rest of the global players the cost of that inflation because the dependency on the currency for the global markets is so great. So, and I think if we look back, and this July will be the 75th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Accords in 1944.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, to us all, really, because the global financial system has been defined in many ways. There are other parameters, right, in the last 75 years that have come onto the table, like computers, like digitization, like data, like blockchain, like sensors. I mean, there's so much going on. But certainly the status of the US dollar as the global reserve currency has allowed America in this 75-year period to really build a growing economy with the feature of its money supply also being in high demand around the world by nature of its reserve status, and also other kind of political and social trust and credibility ideas.
And that's what's interesting to me. And when I said earlier it's being used as a weapon, there are countries out there who are actively trying to remove the dollar as the reserve currency, and then at the same time the petrodollar, which signifies that all oil transactions need to be settled in dollars.
Sure, I think
because the U.S. has been abusing it. Do you think that's the case?
Listen, if you look at the 2008 financial crisis and you say, how did we solve a problem that we had? What was the problem that we had? It's obviously very nuanced, but just, the TLDR on it is we way overextended our banking sector, way over leveraged itself, and then ultimately the buck stopped and had to deal with that debt.
And we gave away a lot of really bad mortgages.
Right. I mean, we took on too much risk, right? And we profited from betting against the risk, and then we bet wrong, and the risk overtook the system. And so what did we do? Generically speaking, we printed $4 trillion of new dollars to make the banks solvent because they're too big to fail, because they're the contributors to political campaigns, because it seemed like the right thing to do, because we didn't know what else to do. So there may be a lot of reasons why we did it, but we did do it. And did we suffer massive inflation? Did other countries stop accepting the dollar? No. If you're a different country, if you're, we see this around the world, right? Venezuela, Argentina, Rwanda. If you're a different country and you print 4 trillion units, or the equivalent in your currency of new money to bail out your over leveraged, highly risky, banking sector, your currency is going to suffer some very tremendous consequences in the global markets. You could say that the global reserve status of America and a bunch of other features of America, but that one is certainly one of them, kind of insulates, protects, and in a way outsources or socializes the costs of bad behavior to other players in the global financial system because of that unique status. And so when we set out to build Bancor, what we wanted to create was a kind of currency infrastructure.
We wanted to revive the actual Bancor idea using cryptocurrency.
Yeah, we wanted to create a financial sort of infrastructure that was designed for balance, that was designed to kind of constantly calibrate, recalibrate to achieve balance in the system. To your question about weaponizing and things like that, I think what we're seeing play out, and again, this has many nuances to it, but what we're seeing play out is a great imbalance, right? When one country is so imbalanced with other countries, then you get the 99%, you get Occupy movements, you get the calls for a new Bretton Woods, you get the calls to replace the global currency with everything from the Chinese national currency to gold to Bitcoin to just anything else. I think one of the challenges with these cries for change is that often what they're suggesting is more of the same, right? Should it be the U.S. currency, or should it be the Chinese currency? Should it be the Russian currency? Should it be gold? Should it be Bitcoin? And I think the Bancor idea and what the Bancor idea was kind of inspired us to think about was, can it be something better? Can it be something that's decentralized? Can it be something, importantly, that's not for profit? Can it be something that doesn't, by its very nature of being the
very
hub,
good questions,
center, backbone currency of the system, doesn't by default give some, really imbalanced benefits or really imbalanced deficits to different players in the ecosystem? And now we created the Bancor token and the Bancor protocol and infrastructure, not for to play Keynes and try and implement a global supranational currency for all the nations to jump on board with. We looked at a more kind of personal use case to something near and dear to us, which is in the bottom up economy. If you're creating
so
new
you're taking a lot of
currencies,
different ideas and thoughts and wants that have been asked or spoken about with fervor since the early days of Bitcoin, since 2011. And some of those thoughts are, a lot of people in the early days, like myself, got involved because of the crypto anarchist movement, through the libertarian movement, through some of part of the anarchist movement. And the idea is to basically create, allow Bitcoin or crypto to be this global settlement cryptocurrency. So that's one idea, and that's an idea that you've had. The second idea, and I'm happy you touched on it because I was trying to get to it, was your Bancor bypasses or transcends. I like that word, transcends the Fed. Your idea, your project, Bancor, transcends governments, and it allows that settlement currency or that settlement network to be used by individual people and not needing to be delegated or abused or manipulated by respective governments. And it's not because we don't want to have to trust these governments. They're good at whatever they're good at. But if we can bring it down to a personal level by each person, me here in America doing trade with someone in Zimbabwe or someone in China, and being able to access or utilize this global settlement layer, it could potentially solve not just trade or banking, but it could solve world peace. Why not, right?
Why not? You got it. It's a bottom up approach. So it's basically, it comes back to the question of what is money at all, and why can't people just create money? So the folks behind Bitcoin, maybe you know them, maybe I know them. They created Bitcoin. Now we look back, Bitcoin is money. It's not as liquid as dollars. It's not as well known as gold, but it's certainly on its way, and it's certainly usable as money. There are many, many places where you can
is that a
Bitcoin
problem, though?
and you can get the thing that you want.
Is that a problem, though, because it became money? It can't be a settlement layer?
It's not a problem at all. It may have trade-offs like you're describing. It's not a problem at all. What I mean to say is that Bitcoin, from our perspective, and Bitcoin really inspired us to then create Bancor. Bitcoin was the first user-generated money in history, in modern history. It was the first money not created by a nation or not created by a multinational, like a corporate, like think of airline miles or other things that are issued that can then be traded for goods and services or for other monies.
It was a social experiment. Bitcoin is the largest socioeconomic experiment the world has ever seen.
And so the question that we asked ourselves was, okay, how does this scale? Not how does Bitcoin scale, though we hope Bitcoin scales as well, and it's a huge part of our education in this space. But how do more people create more money? How do we remove the monopoly power of money creation from wherever it exists today, whether it's feds, central banks, or corporates, centers of any kind? How do we give the power of money creation to the people? What is preventing people from creating money? And what we understood was that this liquidity between money is the problem. Why? Because unless your money launches with the ability to be globally adopted, like everyone knows it, or even just nationally adopted, or even outside of your friend group adopted, your money isn't very valuable. Your money is more like barter. Your money is more like social capital between some people who like each other or like the idea or like the project or like the restaurant. But in order for your money to actually be money in the way we conceive of money, that it's a token that can be redeemed for goods and services from society, even if that good is a different token that you may want. In order for it to be money, it's got to be liquid to other monies, or else we're always going to be in this chicken and egg game that the money isn't adopted enough to be money, so it's not money. And so our question that we asked was, how do we allow small, new, custom, niche monies to actually be money in the system? We need to create a kind of neutral, not-for-profit, decentralized infrastructure that will allow any currency to have sort of a rational, and by rational in this case we mean mathematical and transparent exchange rate to other currencies, where you don't need to go down the path of biz dev or agreements between nations or agreements between companies. Like that's not a scalable system, as we know.
And you need adoption.
Yeah, and so that's how Bancor was born. Is how do you get adoption when you need adoption to get adoption? How does money become money when you need people to believe it's money in order for it to be money? And that was the question that we were asking ourselves and trying to solve for. And the Bancor protocol was really born to separate liquidity, like the moneyness of money, from volume, the adoption or the trade demand for money. Today,
the moneyness
the
of money.
moneyness of money needs to be separate from the volume or the demand.
I'm writing that down.
For that money. And that's not to say that we wanted to create a system that would allow shitty shit coins to be money.
Some of those shitty shit coins are our sponsors. This episode is sponsored, but I'm just joking. Just joking. Speaking of adoption, though, yesterday was Adopt a Dog Day. And I was a little late today because I was walking my puppy, and we just adopted a puppy 7 months ago, and he's adorable. And you have a puppy as well.
It's true. She's not such a puppy, and I wish we were on video so that you, like every other video cast that I've done, can see that we live here in the office together. She's 6 years old. Negev is her name, and it's funny that that you bring it up. No one ever voluntarily brings it up except me, always. I love the name. It's the name of the Israeli desert, of the desert in the southern part of Israel, which is a very
But it's very symbolic. It's a very symbolic desert because it used to be a lot more deserty, and now it's growing. There are cities, Israel. And it's kind of symbolic, and I don't know, did you named Negev before you started Bancor, correct?
Yeah, I named her. So the story with Negev is that I moved to Tel Aviv about 7 years ago. I was a venture partner at Founders Fund, Peter Thiel's VC firm in San Francisco, and I came to Israel to look at the Israeli tech deal flow and build the bridge to over here. And about a year later, decided to stay in Israel and only visit San Francisco, and move back to the build side and only have venture invest in my business. And the Bancor founders and myself previously built a company at that time called AppCoin that was really starting to pilot these custom monies, these user-generated currencies. And I adopted Negev around that time just to be my buddy, and she quickly became kind of my ambassador in a new city, and I walk around everywhere. She's awesome. And the name is actually, because of her color, she's like this kind of yellowy brown, which is the exact color of the desert in my eyes here. And so that's Negev for you. But it's funny that you bring her up, because you had asked me about stories and kind of like personal stories. So here goes. I had actually a really expensive morning because of Negev. Walking her around, I tend to walk her off the leash. I have a really difficult time with the leash concept of like tying her like that. It just feels so unfair, and to both of us really, but to her more. And so I tend to walk her off the leash. And in Tel Aviv, there's a lot of great things about Tel Aviv. Maybe this is one of them too, but you're not allowed to walk dogs off the leash, obviously, and they're pretty adamant about it. And they walk around and give you tickets, and I still do it. I walk her off the leash, let's say 95% of the time. And when people ask me about it, how do you do that without getting tickets? Why do you do that? Oh my gosh. I always say to them, we don't often get tickets, but sometimes we do. And when we do, I consider it the freedom tax. It's a freedom tax, and freedom isn't free. And in the scheme of things, I'm fortunate that I'm able to make that calculation for myself on my priorities. But I pay for the things that I believe in, and I believe that Negev should be able to walk off the leash if she can be safe and keep other people safe. And I pay that freedom tax. I often say that to people. And then this morning, I'm walking her off the leash, and it's that moment, and they descend on me. It's like a very Israeli ops moment, and
they came
down
on you.
on us, yeah. And for the first kind of few minutes, I resist. I resist, and I explain, and I just dislocated my shoulder, and I just had to get her off the leash for a second because she was pulling, and like kind of starting that sob story of why you shouldn't give me a ticket. And I really had a moment with myself where I remembered that I often say I pay a freedom tax, and here they are in this moment to collect the freedom tax. And I'm, making up stories here of why I don't have to pay that tax, but I still want that
You're
freedom.
debating it. You should just accept it.
And I had a really quick switch over to, here's my address, here's my ID, here's my name. Send me the ticket, and it was such an interesting moment because I think about this a lot. Just integrity, and it's fine to make the decision to yes, do the leash, or no, do the leash, or yes, pay the tax, or no, pay whatever you decide is cool. But the consistency of integrity, if you take pride in, the way that you quote unquote get away with this, or the way that you handle this is by doing X, then freaking do X, and don't make the guard feel bad about his job because he caught you doing the thing you're not allowed to do. You chose to do it. You know what the cost is. You said you're willing to pay it, so pay up.
Steve Jobs had a very similar attitude. May he rest in peace. He would drive around without a license plate because he didn't want people to know who he was. And he said something similar. He didn't call it a freedom tax, but in an interview, he said something like, I don't mind being ticketed because I'm willing to pay for my privacy. But it's a very similar concept,
yeah,
right?
So we're probably not exactly the same. Me and Steve, bless his memory. But it's also funny you bring him up. Another untold story is that I grew up a couple blocks down the street from Steve Jobs, in Palo Alto, and my brother and I, who's also my co-founder at Bancor and at all of our businesses before, used to walk our dog, our family dog, Houston. We used to walk him in circles around the Jobs house, for the chance that one day, not a glimpse, for the chance that one day we'd bump into him and we'd pitch him straight up on our business.
What would you have pitched?
So we've been in consumer apps for a while, our whole career really, which is 15 years for me or so, 17 or so for him. And our first business was a company called Mytopia, and we were making multiplayer games for PDAs, which would eventually become smartphones. So PDAs were like the Palm Pilot, if you remember.
The Palm Pilot. I had one. M100.
A lot of people had one.
Oh man, growing up in school, that was the thing. I used to have a Cyberco too. I don't know if people remember Cyberco.
We didn't have those. I didn't have those personally, but the Palm Pilot became, if you remember, the Palm Trio 600 was the first official kind of smartphone. It was a Palm Pilot that you could also had a huge antenna on it. You could also make a phone call, and then it became the Trio 650, and then Windows Mobile issued a version of it that had Windows instead of Palm OS, and then Microsoft went down that direction with the Moto Q, and then BlackBerries got colored screens, and then they started making phone calls, and
here we have the iPhone.
and that was the business that we were in. We made the first multiplayer games for those devices.
Was the iPhone your idea? Because you were in that space, you're walking your dogs, you're pitching Steve Jobs. This is an Untold Stories podcast.
The story that's untold is that poker, Texas Hold'em, on iPhone was our idea. It was our idea. We actually preloaded. So we had a really successful game called Multiplayer Championship Poker Texas Hold'em edition. It worked on Palm OS, Windows Mobile, BlackBerry, Symbian, all the platforms. We've had this interoperability mindset in our business kind of from the beginning, this cross-platform, now it's cross-chain mindset, which Bancor supports as well. And we put that game, the poker game, on, what did we put it on? We put it on an iPod. We put it on an iPod. And we put one on a Trio, like a Palm Trio that had a SIM card, like was actively an active phone. And we put it in a bag and we wrote him this extensive letter from his neighbors, dear hero kind of thing. And
Wow.
we put it in a bag and we literally put it in his gate. Like,
So wait, so can
and we said, what if the iPhone
I need
had
to,
these games on it? What if the iPhone had games on
I need to say something.
it?
So you essentially put
show.
these games on, right? So you essentially put this game on two separate devices. Now, does that mean that these devices, people can play with each other?
Yeah, it meant that you could have an 8-person poker game where each person at the table was playing on a different operating system. One person.
Okay, so do you realize what you're telling me, right? You essentially, and this is what I like to get at, in your brain, since you were a child, you've been trying to figure, subconsciously, your life goal, it seems like, is to solve a similar problem. So here you are, a long time ago, solving a problem of illiquidity of poker players on one device. So you said, instead of having one device be the main device where people can play poker on, I'm going to allow poker to be played on 8 different devices. And this was the pre-smartphone era. This was pre-iPhone. So this wasn't something that was even conceptualized back then, correct? So here you are, and you take this concept and you solve it. You solve the problem. You put it in a manila envelope. You mail it to Steve Jobs.
And then and we said in the note, what if the iPhone had these games on it? And actually the iPhone launched, if you remember, like the first iTunes version of the iPhone, the first version of the iPhone that had iTunes on it and that had the downloadable app store, had a few apps from Apple that were made by Apple, just a few. And one of them was Texas Hold'em Poker by Apple.
Wow. So now you buy Apple, right? So you've essentially, the concept of Bancor, you essentially applied it to a whole different sector before cryptocurrency really even existed. So now you took the same problem that you focused in crypto, and you looked at that problem and you said, I'm going to solve it the same way I solved the problem of interoperability on various smartphones with playing poker.
Yeah.
Isn't that insane? Like how it's like such a good crossover. Have you ever thought about that before?
It feels insane sometimes. I don't think it's insane. I think it's consistent. And the thing that we have always kind of looked towards and that has always informed, I think, our work and our life, I'll speak for myself maybe, is collaboration, is interoperability, is connectivity between
But this
people.
is not just collaboration. This is a very specific solution.
It's that interoperability that is the flavor of life, if you will, that is culture. So as someone who grew up in Palo Alto in the 90s, also in the 80s, but also in the 90s, you feel this internet grow up with you, and you feel both the kind of promise in terms of what it said to be able to do, and then you feel also the reality of what it actually does. And I think that informs our work a lot as well, right? There's this promise of, everyone can connect, bringing knowledge, democratizing knowledge across the globe. And then there's sort of the commercial reality of the internet or of any of the platform wars, and I'm talking even of an intranet time before the internet. And the reality is a little different. I think that's what makes us so excited about blockchain and decentralization, is that the people who grew up and kind of watched some of the pitfalls of that industry are the ones at the wheel at driving and also financing and also regulating and also all the things in this industry. And we have an opportunity to kind of really upgrade how this works. So when I say collaboration, in that case, what we meant is that a good poker game is not limited to only people who have Palm OS pilots. A good poker game is a collaboration of a bunch of different people. When we look at Bancor, and by the way, after Mytopia, we made another business called Particle Code, which actually brought that interoperability between the smartphone platforms to other developers. So in Mytopia, we made our own games on that platform, and at Particle Code, we let other people make their content on that platform. There's a lot of other apps beyond games that could use this kind of cross OS interoperability. And now if we bring it forward to Bancor, the idea is everyone can make a currency as long as there's interoperability between them, as long as they speak the same language. It also is very sort of protocol in its nature. And in Silicon Valley in those, the 80s and 90s, the protocols that we take for granted today, TCP, IP, and HTTP and SMTP, they were built in that place at that time. That was the language. I remember my dad had he would always go to business trips and conferences, and he would bring me back like what then I called a gift, and now I call conference swag. And like he got me this shirt. I remember.
What was conference swag?
Well, I'll tell you exactly. It's almost embarrassing, but it was there was this shirt and it said "Parlez-vous SMTP." Because the conference was in Paris and it had this Eiffel Tower, and they were pushing SMTP as the protocol for email, and that's what it said, and like that was the shirt, and I wore it all the time.
I want that shirt. I want that shirt.
Don't anymore. So it's that shirt, and it's the Synoptics shirt, and it's the 3Com shirt, and the Bay Partners shirt, and the Oracle shirt, and that was the language of the time. Was what is the language of the internet? What is the interoperability standard that lets everyone plug in? And that's really what we think a lot about at Bancor in terms of the protocol, and what I think of in terms of collaboration. Because if you go one layer down from the Bancor protocol as a interoperability network for tokens, and you actually zoom into any one token, tokens are interoperability tools for communities, for groups of people. That's what money is. Money is a technology that we use to collaborate. If you were alone on an island, just you would not need money, and you would not use money, and you'd not care for money. Even if you were there for 1,000 years, and you were able to survive 1,000 years, it was just you would never in those 1,000 years make money or use it or care for it or think about it, because money is for interoperability between people. It's how we cooperate, literally, how we coexist.
And when we can trade with people and communicate with those people without having a centralized or another larger institution like a government telling us how to trade or what to say or what to think, we will eventually stop hating those people, no?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I can say that, if you believe in freedom, and if you believe in people, that like the base nature of people, if they don't feel threatened, if they don't feel scared, is to be good, or at least to coexist or live and let live, then yeah, you want the most interoperability possible. Also, if you believe that so much of our problem and our challenge comes from essentially power struggles, then the more you can reduce these inequalities of power, the more you can change the leverage game so that people are on the same playing field. I think the less struggle you'll have on that front.
It's thoughts like that eventually give me the strength and help me sleep at night, knowing that there's a possibility that we're involved in that coming together of the people and allowing us to all stop hating each other. You and I have very similar childhoods. Like you, my parents unsuccessfully tried to make Aliyah. We talked about it. We spent a lot of time back and forth in Israel. I went to some schools. I went to yeshiva in Brooklyn.
So we had pretty different childhoods.
Yeah, right. But well, your parents actually did it.
Well, first of all,
Your
we're
parents
reverse
actually did
commuting.
it.
My parents came from Israel to America.
Oh, they came
Yeah,
from
yours may be
Israel to
the other
America for,
way.
and then went
Also, California and New York, let's talk about, apples and oranges.
East versus West. But you did what I've always dreamed of doing. My dream was to make Aliyah. In fact, I tried many times, and my parents would hide my birth certificate and things like that, so I couldn't. I tried. Actually, I walked in. I was in Israel, and I walked into the office of the IDF, and I said, "I'm ready. Like, I want to enlist." I was 20 years old, and my parents wouldn't send me my birth certificate because they didn't want to let me do
Yeah,
it.
you can
It was
understand,
my,
parents not wanting their children in
but it
military
was the
conflict.
sure,
Um,
but it was more of wanting to be a part of
yeah,
something. The feeling of wanting to be a part of this greater movement. Did you have any of that growing up?
yeah, definitely. I love living in Tel Aviv. I absolutely love it. I grew up in Silicon Valley, also a great place, obviously, to live and to grow up. And I've never looked back, not even a day, since moving here. And it's not without its problems. There's tons of problems anywhere you go, certainly in the Middle East, certainly in Israel. But I think when it comes down to it, these are the problems I want to have. And it's Tel Aviv specifically is a really great city, great weather, great food, great beach, really walkable, very dog friendly. Um, Amazing industry. If you're in fashion, you can do great work here. If you're in business, you can do great work here. If you're in technology, you can do great work here. If you're in 3D printing, like
But
everything
what gave you that connection?
is very thriving here. I think that
What gave you that connection? You traveled a lot probably when you were younger, and but eventually you made Aliyah. You moved to Israel. Why? That's what I'm
I
trying to
think
get at.
that the Silicon Valley upbringing makes technology kind of the language of progress, the language of our generation, and the progress can be good and it can be bad for sure, but it's certainly progress and change. Um, I think that language led me to kind of discovering a bridge between Silicon Valley and Israel. I mentioned that I was in that role kind of professionally on the venture capital side for a moment, and kind of that connection between the sciences and the innovation in Israel and then the capital and the markets in California always felt like a really natural bridge to build. And yeah, I love the story of the collaboration of these people. I get a lot out of Jewish wisdom in general, even though I'm not practicing. I don't practice religion
Me
very
neither. And
specifically.
but a lot of the concepts you talk about are similar in old Jewish wisdom, like the whole kibbutz galuyot, bringing back together of all the
Yeah,
tribes and the
and light
collaboration
unto
in that
nations and
respect.
things. Though I will say that I think every nation can and should and in its way does bring light unto nations. And I think that the wisdom that I find in Judaism, I think you can find it also in Islam. You can find it also in Buddhism. You can find it also in indigenous cultures. And in fact, that kind of sacred indigenous wisdom is something that I'm learning a lot about lately, and really welcoming into my life and welcoming into these conversations about economics and about kind of healthy collaboration.
Give me an example.
So, the really untold story is that I'm hosting
Here we
I'm
go.
hosting a redux of Bretton Woods, of the Bretton Woods Accord, or the Bretton Woods conference in July. And my aim at such a gathering is to really bring very diverse voices to the table and ask ourselves sort of where we're at with economics, and where we want to go. And what does a human economic system of the future look like, where it's win-win and additive, where it's in a sustainable, healthy relationship with the resources that we have on the planet, and where it's in line with our ethics, whether those are around inclusion, fairness, health, well-being, things like that. And so, what begins as an economic conference with let's hear from whoever it may be. Take a Larry Summers or a Eric Weinstein, or these voices in both classic economics, modern heteroeconomics, as they call it. Let's also get a sacred instructions. Let's also get Sherry Mitchell is her name. She's a Native American legal activist, and she wrote a book called Sacred Instructions: How to Bring That Wisdom to Change Making. Let's talk about The Chalice and the Blade, a book also that I love to recommend, which looks at kind of feminine and masculine models around coexistence, domination versus nurturing or collaboration. And they don't have to be exclusive. They can certainly exist together. They need to be balanced. And the interesting thing about balance is that it's a constant aspiration, right? Because the moment everything is moving, and so the moment you get to balance, you begin to get out of balance in a sense, right? It's like the moment we got tech that made us more efficient, we got over hyper efficient and like don't look each other in the eyes anymore. The moment we do this, we do that. Like things are very are very fluid and are very much in motion. And so if balance is something that you strive for, it's something that you're always striving for, in the sense of kind of correct and recorrect.
Do you strive for it?
I do strive for it. I can't say that I feel anywhere close to achieving it. As you may know, and others in the field know, these jobs in cryptocurrency, in startups in general, and they're not unique, right? Jobs are hard. Lots of jobs are hard. These jobs are really hard, and you can lose yourself in them. Certainly, I think that in the hours and in the global nature of it, and there's a crypto event every minute, and there's 24/7 media, and there's always someone attacking you, either you or your tech or your industry or your whatever.
Your dog?
And there's
Today?
Well, that's actually the thing, is that that walk that I took with her in the morning, that is part of my balance. That I did that walk, and I did it for a whole hour, and she was off the leash. But I would say I don't do it enough. I don't think anyone quite does it enough. I think that it's something that I'm hyper aware of, and I'm always striving to improve on.
But most people aren't. So you're talking about balance, and to be balanced and to be conscious of the need to be balanced. Think of 5 spokes in a wheel of a bicycle, right? If one spoke is off, then the whole chain falls off. To be balanced, you need to be grounded. My question to you is, it seems like to me that you are pretty well grounded. Do you feel like you are? And if you are, what in your life has given you that grounding? You talk to drug addicts, you talk to former addicts, you talk to alcoholics, you talk to anyone who's been through a very traumatic event in their life, good or bad. And it's something like that's their grounding moment. For me, it was getting handcuffed at JFK Airport and then going through the justice system, serving 18 months in prison. And that's something that I'll always, until I'm 120 years old, I'll always remember that as, hey, don't do something stupid, because that can happen. Was there any moment for you like that?
Am I grounded? I'm pretty grounded. I think grounded is also a personality type. I'm very detail oriented. If you're in details, you kind of have to be grounded, because you're very aware when details are being missed or overlooked. I think that the balance for me actually comes from the different configurations in my life that bring a little bit more maybe air to the ground, right? Because balance is not, for me, in my conception of it, balance is not about being grounded. It's about, if you're grounded, having air and vision around you. If you're airy, and if you're airy and in the vision layer, then it's about having grounded, detail-oriented people around you. And that's why I say that I think collaboration is really the key. And I even made this Facebook status update once, which I don't do often, but I came home from a day and just pulled out the phone and I wrote, And it was during the AppCoin days, which was a long battle that we fought to try to get those products off the ground. Talk about too early, right? Trying to get community currencies off the ground in 2013, 14, 15. But I wrote, if content is king, collaboration is queen. We have this idea that content is king, and I tend to resonate with it, that, the artists and the brands and the ones with the content that people, and we see this play out with Netflix and HBO and Game of Thrones and Amazon and all that. Content is king, and people want that content. And king and queen together in general is a balanced construction. And queen brings collaboration, because if you're content king, but you're alone at the top, or you're such an asshole, you're not going to get the kind of distribution and recognition that good collaboration could get you. And so I think that groundedness is great, airiness is great, fluidity and extroversion is great, and fire and introversion is great. It's all potentially great. What's the greatest is kind of the balance. And again, it's not equal. And for everyone, we're not wheels with 5 spokes. We're each very unique shapes. So balance for any of us looks a little bit different, but we know it when we feel it. And I think that's kind of the guiding principle for me. So at Bancor, my co-founders, and bless them, everyone brings really different and really super powers to the table, and hopefully together the collaboration is balanced. And I think.
What if you guys disagree on something?
What if we ever agree on something? That's a shorter podcast. We disagree all the time. I think that's the beauty of the beast, in a sense. I think one of the best ways to fail is to surround yourself by people that agree with you all the time on everything. We certainly have really different opinions about almost everything. I would say the trick, and we're by no means at the end of our journey to get there, but the trick seems to be figuring out how to hold space for different ideas, even the ones that are the most repulsive to you, or the most upsetting to you, or seem the most just retarded to you. And something actually I wanted to bring up with you in terms of your show and just how we are in our industry in terms of talking across ideas. You've got your Bitcoin maximalists and your altcoin enthusiasts, and you've got your EOS, fans, and you've got your, there's a lot of different ideas.
What do you call Ripple people?
What are Ripple people?
Well, like you just believe, you know, the EOS fans. I was like,
what do I call them? I don't personally call them anything.
This episode is sponsored by Ripple Labs.
And listen, if it were, and you know, that's cool. The cool thing about Ripple or anyone else sponsoring your show is that, you know, that's a collaboration. To give the resources for your project to take off is a collaboration. And I think that
I'm not sponsored by Ripple. I'm
just it's a metaphor, you know, and in fact, I encounter this a lot with things that I try to get off the ground, and we talk about a lot in the industry. You know, there were those. There's a lot of people that hate all the speculation that's come into the industry, right? And certainly all the speculators on all the ICOs and all the tokens, all the markets, certainly brought a lot of chaos and a lot of negative side effects. A lot of people getting wrecked. A lot of bad attention in the media, a lot of misunderstanding about what we're trying to do in the space, generically speaking or broadly speaking, certainly brought a lot of negative outcomes, but it also brought in a lot of capital. It also, you know, brought the conversation into the mainstream. And so when people hate on speculators or hate on regulators or hate on entrepreneurs or hate on bankers, anytime there's hate, generally there's a missed opportunity for a better collaboration.
A lot of those speculators eventually become the CEOs of our companies.
Sure, that's one outcome, and a lot of the capital that came in is empowering teams that are and will build real tech and make real progress here. I think one of the really hard things about innovation and entrepreneurship, if you will, is that before people know about it, before it works, there's a long, painful, you know, sweaty history of it not working, but getting closer to working. And those people don't usually get the credit. Eyal Herzog, my co-founder, one of my co-founders here at Bancor, he's our chief product architect. He had a company in the early 90s called contact.com. And it was basically Facebook. It was, everyone's got their contact, like their contact card. That's like their name, their this and their that, and what they do, and blah, 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 blah. Between the contacts, you can talk and chat and friend each other and all the things. And there are many, many stories like that of many, many products and innovations and ideas that got us closer to Facebook. In the narrative, we only know Facebook. And, if 5 years from now, there's some blockchain that you and I don't even know of yet, but it's the one. Will Ethereum, be there within the story? Will Bitcoin be there in the story? Will EOS be there in the story? I don't know.
I feel like Satoshi, when he wrote the white paper, he did credit a lot of the earlier failed projects in his white paper, B Money and Hashcash and our POW, RPOW, and a few of the other ones. That was one that Adam Back. RPOW was the one that Hal Finney had conceptualized. Yeah,
I think it's one of the greater things about what he or she did. I think that credit.
The first person to walk through the door gets shot.
Yeah, and the one to run up the hill takes the arrows in the back and all the things. And I think it's a really it's a really hard it's a really hard part of this job because there's no other way to do this job. There's no other way to succeed but to fail. There's no other way to invent Ethereum, but to try, for years and years and not invent Ethereum until you do. And there's no other way to invent whatever comes next after Ethereum and solve scaling or whatever it is without inventing Ethereum and having it not scale yet. And so I think that one of the biggest opportunities we have in crypto and in global economics and in general is learning, and it's kind of an individual and collective process, but learning how to have conversations with people we really disagree with. And I think that technology is making that a little bit harder for us in a way because the algorithms and the feeds, which are built on profit making, right? They're ultimately trying to get you to click on things and buy things. The way that you are the most comfortable clicking on things and buying things is if you are the most in your comfort zone, if you're hearing things that are the most appealing to you, if you're seeing products that are the most specific to you, if you're getting endorsements or positive feedback from people that you admire and that you like and that you trust and that you've heard of. There's some really good TED Talks on this topic where that echo chamber that we're finding ourselves in is actually making it much, much harder for us to talk to people we disagree with, which is where most of the opportunity is to grow and to progress. I think we see this playing out in our industry between kind of entrepreneurs and regulators. We see it between the platform, the crypto tribalism, that kind of thing. Certainly in politics, we cannot have a conversation anymore about different ideas of what to do. And I think that actually, for us here at Bancor, at least, it really reinforces the idea of working on interoperability. We're not trying to propose the currency solution that's going to work for everyone. We're trying to propose an infrastructure that allows people to suggest their own currencies. Maybe some are centralized, maybe some are decentralized, maybe some are very, equally distributed.
You essentially want to
some are less equally distributed. Maybe you have a currency that's just for teachers, and that's super helpful, and that's great. And maybe you have a currency that doesn't know who you are, and that's the beauty in it. We want to encourage.
It seems like you want to move the world. It seems like you want to move the world to a less top-down approach or pyramid-like approach to a more.
It's more of a web-like structure.
A web-like structure. How will that change? How will that change the world? I mean, what we talk about that all the time, but not just with technology, with cryptocurrency, but if we could change the whole world and how us as human beings act and react towards things and do things and treat each other as humans, how will that give us what that world looks like?
I think that in a way, and this is not an original thought by any means, but it seems that with power comes oppression. And so these pyramid-like structures where...
I thought you were going to say great responsibility because that's a Spider-Man quote. With power comes great responsibility.
Sure, to not oppress, and it seems to not be that responsibility.
Well, because good intentions are not transferable.
Well, because I think that the natural inclination is to protect what you have, and if you're in the center and you have the most, then you have that same natural inclination to protect what you have. And I think that that oppression is something that we can change by shifting the centers of power. And again, not replacing them by, ooh, you're a bad holder of power, let's get a better holder of power in there, but by almost dissolving them, and not dissolving them into anarchy per se, where, you know, there's lawlessness and there's no structure, but creating a more inclusive system for people to design the system that people live in and live under. And today we have very little choice. I think even in the places in the world where we have the most choice, right? America, democracy, elections, what it feels like to me is even the things we choose, let's say, in our voting, we don't actually get. Right, because everything has become kind of a cynical, money-driven, money paid for, money holder paid for circus, if you will, of promises with no accountability, or even if there's an intention for accountability, there's no capacity to execute anything that was promised because of the complexity of the system. And so I think we need to basically try and unhook some of these dependencies from each other. And that's something that blockchain seems like it has a lot to offer towards, because it allows us to make things more transparent, make things more immutable, program different codes, program other codes, create interoperability between different programs and code. And I think that that's kind of what keeps us really excited about the opportunity that this industry has to play, like you said, a constructive role in moving forward. Is not, do we have all the answers and can we suggest the better leader or the better currency or the better system?
You want to remove the need for a leader.
Yeah, you want to let people try to lead, and you want to let the people who choose to follow a leader live in that space, and for these different spaces to be interoperable in a sense. You need to put the kind of the parameters around where one person or group doesn't impose on the other person or group's freedom.
How does that work in real life? Because people are always going to impose.
So there's this saying in Israel in Hebrew, it's so very Israeli, but it goes like this. Everybody pees in the pool, but nobody pees off the diving board. And what it means to say is that, bad behavior, or like behavior that's not super positive for the collective, is a human feature. If you don't think you'll get caught. And it's from the littlest things, like parking illegally, if you don't think you'll get a ticket, and onward. When I think of blockchain tech and what it can offer to our sort of solution finding in terms of these really big systemic problems, I think of blockchain like a diving board. It puts us up on a diving board. It puts our leaders up on a diving board. It puts companies up on a diving board. When you can see things transparently, what's happening, take departmental budgets for the government. Like, let's put it on a blockchain. Let's see exactly what is being spent on what, before we even talk about change, before we even talk about analyzing it, or weighing in on whether it's good or bad, or let's see it. Let's see it, and let's make it totally obvious and totally trustworthy that what we're looking at is the truth. And I think blockchain has a lot to offer there. Let's take elections. Let's see it. Let's see it clearly. Let's know beyond a shadow of a doubt that whoever voted X or Y voted X or Y. Let's see it. Let's see the data. That doesn't mean that everyone needs to become, an Etherscan expert and know how to use all these tools, but you bet your butt that if these things were available, someone would be combing them. Many people would be combing them, and that information would rise to the surface, and people would get wind of much more detail in terms of what is actually going on. So, I don't pretend to have some scheme in my head for the perfect society, but I certainly think that transparency is a major bottleneck that we have, because we don't actually know what happens, and probably half the stuff we know is not actually what happens. And if blockchain can help with that, I think we'll be 10 steps forward in terms of finding solutions.
What are the arguments against transparency? Like, people who argue say no, we shouldn't put the government budgets on the blockchain.
I'll give you my perspective as a business owner. Sometimes in a business you get asked for more transparency, like what do you spend everything on? And there's a really practical problem with letting everyone in your company, for example, know what everything costs. Take salaries, for example. Do you want everyone in your company to know what everyone else's salary is? Maybe. I'm not saying definitely not, but there's certainly problems that come up there. There's certainly some added energy that needs to go into dealing with a configuration like that.
But do we want to put our defense budgets, how much we spend on the army?
If you ask me what's the pushback to transparency, the pushback when it exists, I think the high integrity pushback is that sometimes details, the public or anyone knowing details about things is actually counterintuitive to what you're trying to achieve.
But who gets to decide that?
Yeah, that's the question. And I think a big barometer for that is public versus private service. So I think that things, that are kind of in the shared domain of like using taxpayer money.
Roads, things like that.
Yeah, like you're saying, government budgets, things like that. I think that's probably an area where we're more likely to fairly demand and benefit from transparency. Private sector, does private sector need to be more transparent? I think definitely yes. Insofar as they're asking the public sector for a lot of support, right? You want to be totally not transparent, no problem, no bailout, right? And that kind of comes back to that integrity sort of consistency argument, which is if you're relying on other people to help you or save you in a time of need, then is a balanced relationship with those people is to let them know what's going on. If you're doing your own thing completely, and there are very few things that we can do all on our own, right? Maybe you're uber wealthy and you can live a full stack life without ever talking to anyone, but your jet is polluting the air that we all breathe. So, we're a society, we're literally social creatures, and we're all one thing. So there's not a lot of areas where you're completely off of the shared ledger, if you will, of where you'd want to balance transparency and accountability with strategy and privacy. But there's definitely a spectrum there, right? Like how you manage your family budget is maybe not
everything operates on a spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. So I think public service, public servants, public offices are probably great places to implement higher transparency. When you get into the security game, you get into a lot more nuances around what's strategic. I think there are those who would say that the more we share, even though it's really scary, the more we share and open up these dark places that we're used to thinking have to be kind of dark in order to protect us. There's a viewpoint that says that's not right.
But it only works if everyone does it. It only works if everyone does it, or super majority of people do it.
Yeah, that's the democratic peace theory, right? Is that only if everyone's democratic and peaceful in a way does it work. And that's really, I think, where the consciousness and kind of the mindfulness movements have so much to say and so much to offer, right? Because the more that folks plug into that idea that we are super interdependent, we are one thing in the sense of like one planet, it's one water system we all share, it's one biosphere that we're all depending on. The more that we plug into that, I think the less likely we are to overtly abuse the system. But certainly that's the calibration, is how to protect against the bad apples. I think
Isn't it interesting that human beings, we have these instinctual things that are programmed in our minds for thousands of years that are counteract each other, not counteract, but are completely like different. For example, you brought up two different ones. One of them is that we're all human beings, we're all together, we're all the same, we all need to work with each other for the greater good. And that's definitely like a known thing, that if when the shit hits the fan, we all come together and work together. But then when things are good, we're all fighting each other. But that's also a human instinct. Why is that? Why do we have like these counterproductive instinctual programmings in our heads?
Well, I don't know how much of it is instinctual or programmed, but it's definitely it's culture. It's human culture, and it definitely evolves and changes over time. The stuff that I read about this that I like and that I like to recommend is Spiral Dynamics. Spiral Dynamics by Don Beck is, and it's another example of like an idea and a thought process that I like to bring to the table to economic conversation. Spiral Dynamics basically says that we're in this constant calibration, right, of like action and reaction. Like, ooh, we were too selfish, now we got to be really kumbaya. Ooh, we're too kumbaya, now we got to be more self-interested, right? It's this constant back and forth calibration, but it's not moving like right to left, like a pendulum. It's moving right to left, but also forward. Okay, so that's the spiral. That's where the spiral comes from, and it goes something like this. In the first phase of humanity, the right to left is like, are we more focused on the individual, or are we more focused on the collective, the group? So at first, you're an organism, and early evolution, and the only thing you care about is your organism, getting enough food, getting water, whatever, sex, whatever you need to survive, multiply. You only care about yourself. Then you realize there are other organisms. Okay, and now together, like, that's your best chance of succeeding, of thriving, of multiplying, of growing. So now all you care about is the collective. Then you take, and that's kind of like a very tribal, like the tribal time. Then you realize there are other tribes, and those tribes can take your food, take your resources, take your women, whatever. And so now you're very defensive against them, and it's your tribe versus another tribe. Then you realize that with the other tribes, you can collaborate. They have spices, you have this. Now you're very focused on like protecting the trade route, so it's safe, so that the merchants can move from place to place, because that's good for everyone if we can trade and thrive and grow, right? So it's this kind of constant back and forth, but also forward motion that we go through as a society. And of course, not everyone or every group is going through at the same pace, but everyone is going through the same sequence. Is what Spiral Dynamics seems to say. And where we are kind of right now is in this interesting time where, if you come off of World War II, what we needed then was to create this kind of order, these systems that are clear. Like, we're so traumatized from World War II. I mean, that's traumatizing, right, for many people in many, many different ways. We need now order. We need cultures, we need rules, we need laws. And that's when you get into the Cold War. You get into our rules and cultures and laws and ideas, and their rules and culture and laws and ideas. But it's a very systems-oriented approach, and your loyalty is to the system, right? Your loyalty is to capitalism, or your loyalty is to communism. And the next phase that we go into from that is this, what's called kind of the entrepreneurship phase, or like, this is the Ayn Rand and the objectivism, that phase, which is, the system, whatever, it's great, but it's holding me down. Like, I'm a uniquely talented person in this system. I'm uniquely capable, uniquely motivated, uniquely driven. I should have the right to break out if I want. I should go forward. I should accumulate whatever it is I can and what I want. I should create. I should give. I'm not a system. I'm a person. I'm a damn successful person, whatever it is.
Collectivism to individualism.
Yeah, so
Where are
then
we now?
you go to this kind of entrepreneurship, and that this entrepreneurship, is the generation of, by the way, Alan Greenspan and laissez-faire capitalism. Let people do whatever. That's the best thing for the system. The more people do whatever moves them and motivates them, the more they're personally incentivized to grow, to create, to succeed, to accumulate, the better off we'll all be. That's how trickle-down economics is born, right? If we let the stars shine, if we let the stars rise, they're going to create so much value that it's going to be good for everyone. And Anne Rand actually is a big hero of Alan Greenspan's. He brought her to his inauguration or whatever it's called when they instated him at the Fed. And then we got 20 years of economic policy, and this is very apparent in our banking system and in kind of deregulating a lot of the financial system, which said, let them do whatever they're good at doing. By the way, you guys, regulators, policymakers, lawmakers, voters, you don't really understand it. It's very complicated and technical, this finance. Let them do whatever they want. That will be better for everyone. Fast forward 20 years, you get the financial crisis, because turns out that the invisible hand, this invisible self-interest, doesn't actually pause to look and acknowledge that we're all one thing and we're all one system. And if there's tons of poverty at your doorstep, that's actually bad for you long term. So you better invest in your community, even people that you don't like or you don't trust or you don't know. Turns out that doesn't actually happen on a systemic level. What actually happens is that fewer and fewer people accumulate more and more and more. And the culture starts to idealize those people. The Elon Musk and the Zuckerbergs and the heads of the banks and all of that idolatry makes that look like success, and everything else look a little less shiny. And then, by the way, someone else will pay for it when they mess up or when they overdo it. And I think that now, at least in American politics, you're hearing kind of the call for the correction, right? And that can be the overcorrection. Let's do 70% taxes on everyone. Let's kind of go backwards to where it's not possible for the stars to rise and shine so bright that they actually burn everyone in the process. And so now we're in this kind of, and each of these phases, by the way, have massively complicated transitional phases where the old cultural system is dying and the new cultural system is being born. And I think where we move from this entrepreneurship phase, which has clearly created a lot of progress, but also a tremendous amount of inequality, and also a tremendous amount of virtualization of value. And by that, I mean financialization, in a sense, right? We have a lot of value being created on paper, but on the table of people that are much less close to that ledger, we don't have enough food. And that's a problem and a real social problem that I think we're seeing kind of all around the world. And so this next phase that we go into is by nature and by default, it's the correction phase or the calibration phase. And that's why I say, I think
what does that look like?
Balance is something you always strive for and never achieve. I think what it looks like is kind of upper limits on accumulation and lower limits on well-being. I think it looks like, which doesn't mean communism, right? It doesn't mean equal. You said before that I thought all people are the same. No, people are definitely not the same, but are people all valuable, and at the very least, are people all by nature, by humanness, entitled to have the chance, a good chance at clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and a safe place to lay their head and a healthy possibility of childbirth and all the rest of the basic things. Yeah, for sure. And if we don't believe that, then we need to either look in the mirror and tell ourselves that we don't believe that. We need to maybe make a change in how fast populations are growing or things like that. It's not the direction I think about too much. But I think that upper limits and lower limits are certainly a kind of calibration. It's not saying everyone's the same, but it's also not saying do what you will, and we hope it all works out. I think that regulation needs to work much, much closer in partnership with the stars of these industries, whoever they may be, in order to really understand the technology quickly, and the technologies or the financials quickly, and come up with the right rules that make the game fun to play. I don't think that the financial crisis, anyone would say that like the banking game is fun to play, or even the people that were
Definitely not fun to play.
succeeding the most in it, right? The heads of all these banks, and I think that so that's one thing that it looks like. I think in terms of globalization, maybe it looks like more balance and calibration in terms of what multinationals and corporates are expected to do for the world in exchange for the wealth and influence that they accumulate. For example, if you're an American business and you ship and you now produce all of your stuff overseas where the humans for you are much more affordable, and by doing that, you've saved and made your business more efficient and profitable. And yet at the same time, you've also kind of removed yourself from your local community in terms of offering local jobs and local wages. And then, there's a balance there that's needed. Does that mean you can't do it? No. Does that mean if you do it, there's a trade-off? Yeah. Does that mean that...
Like what? What's the trade-off? If there's cheaper labor somewhere else?
Maybe pay higher taxes in your home country.
Why?
Exactly for that reason, that what you do when you say just accumulate profit, whatever you need to do to make the most profit.
Shouldn't we want to focus instead of on penalizing someone for that? We focus on instead here asking ourselves, why am I outsourcing the jobs to somewhere else? And what can I do to make my country more competitive to eventually bring the jobs back?
I think you do all of those things, but the reality of the race to the bottom on profits is that you move those jobs there because those people are accepting less money for your work. And so if you say, okay, just be competitive, accept less money for your work, that's fine. But then you need to make food more affordable. Then you need to make houses more affordable. Then you need to make, then you need to remove subsidies from corn farming or whatever. I think
you're definitely making me start to question some of the things that I always thought were true.
Listen, I think that's the thing about balance. Everything that you thought was true, there's another perspective on it. It doesn't mean that it's always right or wrong, or you're always right or wrong, but it definitely, there's definitely a balance to it. And I think the real question we should be asking ourselves is, what are we aiming for? What are we trying to achieve? Like as a society, as a government, as an industry, what is it that we're aiming for?
What are you trying to, and we'll end with this, but what are you aiming for? Like when will you be happy with not only where we are as humans, but where Galia is in the world?
When will I be happy? Next podcast, I'll be happy.
Yeah, tune in next time
for when I'll be happy. I'll tell you. I'll answer your question.
You're not an end of the tunnel person. No, answer my question.
I'll answer your question. When we'll be happy is when here at Bancor, so to speak, is when anyone who wants to can create a currency for their community, for their project, for their next music album, for their things we can't even think of yet. And when those currencies can be freely and fairly traded between people on an open infrastructure that is blockchain agnostic, and that is mathematically governed, and that separates volume from tradability, and that allows for this continuous asynchronous movement of value between people and between whatever people think is valuable. So that's when we'll be happy, and it's it's not tomorrow. It's not tomorrow that we'll be happy. It's a little further.
But isn't it the journey that makes you happy, not the destination?
And that's exactly the thing. Is when you strive for balance, and I mentioned it before, and you realize that you never actually get there, you just constantly have just been there or will be there soon. You realize that that's actually the game. So we're happy
To never pee on the diving board.
to never pee in the pool. The game is
At all.
to, of course, it's to enjoy the journey, and I would say that I personally feel extremely fortunate and blessed and lucky to be able to do this work, and I do this work because I can, and because I can, I must. And that's a really good situation to be in, regardless of how it all plays out.
Will people ever stop peeing in the pool?
No, people won't stop peeing in the pool. Definitely not. But people won't pee off the diving board, and there'll be more diving boards. And if you want to lead, and if you want to get benefits from society, and if you want people to follow you, then you'll have to get up on that diving board.
Galia, thank you so much. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. New episodes of Untold Stories go live every Tuesday at 7 a.m. EST. Links to our Apple and Spotify channels are in the show notes. You can also follow me on Twitter, Charlie Shrem, to continue the conversation. See you next week.